Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of research, the articles, the reports, all the notes you've gathered, and really pull out the insights you need to get ahead. Today, we are strapping in for a deep dive into nanotechnology. You've handed us a phenomenal guide here that covers, well, everything from the fundamental physics of the tiny to the logistics of managing these huge global research projects.
That's right. And our mission today is pretty clear. We're giving you the ultimate shortcut to navigating this space. We need to go beyond just, the simple definition.
Right.
We want to explain why this field isn't just a science, but a uniquely global enterprise. We'll map out the best places to study and, most importantly, dig into the key management insights you need to succeed, where, let's be honest, project failure is pretty common.
Absolutely. Because what we're really tackling today is that core question. How is it that focusing on a scale so tiny, the atomic level, how does that lead to such massive, world-altering opportunities? Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the scale. It's the whole point. We're talking about structures between, 1 and 100 nanometers?
That's the range.
To even get your head around that, a nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. If a marble was a nanometer, the entire Earth would be about a meter wide. We are right at the edge of what's physically measurable.
And that edge, that boundary, is where everything gets revolutionary, because it's where the rules change. The source material really hammers this point home at this scale. The physical, the chemical, even the biological properties of materials they shift fundamentally.
It's not just that they're smaller.
No, not at all. They behave in completely different ways than, the big chunk of material you can hold in your hand.
So give us a couple of those concrete examples, the ones that really make that point stick for the listener.
Okay, think about gold. We all think of gold as noble, right? It's inert, it doesn't react, it's shiny.
Right.
But if you shrink a piece of gold down to just a few nanometers, it suddenly becomes this highly reactive chemical catalyst. Or take carbon. In its normal form, it's soft, like graphite in a pencil. But you arrange it into those famous carbon nanotubes, and it becomes stronger than any steel alloy we've ever made.
That is just a wild transformation. It's fascinating that size alone dictates chemistry. And this change in properties, I guess that explains why the field isn't just one simple discipline. Your research broke it down into 4 main pillars.
It's the ultimate convergence zone. You have nanomaterials, which is all about creating those special structures, nanoparticles, thin films, that kind of thing. Then you've got nanoelectronics, where the whole goal is to push past the limits of our current silicon chips.
Using quantum effects.
Exactly, using quantum effects to make these ultra-efficient devices. So important for AI and advanced computing. The third is nanobiotechnology. That's the intersection with medicine. This is where you get targeted drug delivery, nanoparticles carrying medicine straight to cancer cells and advanced diagnostics.
And the last one was energy.
Yep, nanoenergy systems, all about efficiency. Using things like quantum dots and solar panels to capture more light, or building next-gen batteries.
That synergy is really the engine of the whole field. It's clear that this complexity and the need for these incredibly specialized tools really dictates where the research happens. So why is going global almost a necessity for someone who wants to seriously get into this?
Because the infrastructure you need, it's just prohibitively expensive. You can't replicate it easily. So the immediate benefit of studying abroad is access.
Access to what, specifically?
Access to specialized hubs with advanced research centers, the famous clean rooms, the high-powered electron microscopes, the fabrication labs. You just can't do cutting-edge nano research without these tools.
I remember reading about the clean rooms. It's almost impossible to appreciate the level of cleanliness needed. At the scale we're talking about, a single dust particle is basically a meteor hitting your experiment.
Precisely. And it goes beyond the hardware. Studying abroad guarantees you're integrated with these big, high-tech industries, semiconductors, medical devices, you name it. And because the research is so complex, it all relies on these global research networks. The collaboration you start as a master's student could be the connection that lands you your first job.
So let's map this out for a minute. Your sources pointed to 5 key global hubs. And this is where it gets really interesting, because where you should go really depends on what you want to focus on.
Right. You can break down the national specialties.
The U.S. is kind of the heavyweight champion just in terms of breadth and pure funding. It's really strong in biomedical applications and the bleeding edge of nanoelectronics. But then Germany focuses more on applied science with really strong industry ties. Think huge, high-quality material science centers.
Yeah, they're big on robust nanomaterials. Now, if you're focused on the tech that powers our entire digital world, then Holland is, well, it's a required stop. The Netherlands is a world leader in semiconductor manufacturing and advanced nanomaterials,
So perfect for chip technology.
ideal for chip technology, lithography, anything like that.
And then over in Asia, South Korea is all about advanced manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
Especially in displays and high-volume electronics, with those tight connections to the big global tech companies.
Exactly. They need to commercialize this stuff at speed. And finally, you have Japan, which brings this deep history in precision engineering and advanced materials. They're often pushing the envelope in areas like complex robotics and material purity.
That level of specialization is fantastic, but
Right.
we should probably clarify the path to entry. Someone might look for a nanotechnology degree and not find a lot of options.
Yeah, that's a critical point. While some undergrad tracks exist, the most common entry point, especially for international students who want to do serious research, is at the master's level. Nanotechnology is an applied discipline.
So you come in from another field.
Right. You usually enter through a foundation in material science or applied physics, maybe chemical or electrical engineering. You need that fundamental discipline before you can really specialize at the nanoscale.
Okay, so we have the definition, the scale, and the map.
Mm.
Now, let's do the reality check. This field is demanding, and the research shows that project failure rates are consistently high. That's a huge risk. We have to talk about the management insights that come from failure.
Indeed, it's a steep learning curve. You're reliant on these high-tech tools. There's pressure to specialize. It's tough. The sources break down 6 common reasons why even promising nanotech projects just collapse. And understanding these is really the key to minimizing risk for anyone entering the field. The number one issue is almost always poor reproducibility.
Meaning you make the perfect nanoparticle once, but you can't do it again.
Exactly that. The material properties are so dependent on these subtle little parameters, temperature, pressure, tiny impurities. So a small change, like a new batch of chemicals, can throw the whole outcome off. If you can't make it reliably every time, you don't have something you can scale.
And is that failure related to the second pitfall you found?
Completely. The second pitfall is lack of characterization. Researchers get excited and they jump ahead without thoroughly checking every single stage, the size distribution, the surface chemistry, any impurities. If you don't constantly use advanced tools to characterize your material, you're basically flying blind.
And the surprise failure just pops up later.
It pops up later when you try to scale. And the third one, this hits hardest in the medical space.
The biological interactions.
Yes, the critical failure in nanomedicine is ignoring biological interactions. You can spend years designing a perfect nanoparticle to deliver a drug, but the second it enters the body's own proteins just swarm it and coat it.
It's called protein corona formation, right?
That's it. And this corona completely changes the particle's function. The immune system often just clears it out before it can do its job. It's a huge reason why so many biomedical projects fail.
So the body basically sees it as a foreign invader and neutralizes it, even if it looked perfect in a lab dish.
Precisely. Which leads right into the fourth issue. Insufficient scale-up planning. What works beautifully with a few micrograms in a lab beaker just does not translate to manufacturing at the kilogram level.
It's like trying to build a skyscraper with the tools you use to build a dollhouse.
That's a perfect analogy. You fail to consider batch homogeneity and mass production protocols early on, and it just kills the project.
Okay, moving on. The fifth pitfall isn't about physics, it's about bureaucracy.
And it can be just as deadly. It's the regulatory blind spot. Teams neglect safety assessments, environmental rules, labeling requirements. They just leave it until the end. And you can't afford to spend millions on R&D only to find out you violated a key rule and have to redesign everything.
And the final point brings us back to that cross-disciplinary nature we talked about at the start.
That's the classic problem of siloed teams. Nanotech needs process engineers, material scientists, biologists, regulatory experts, all talking to each other. If they aren't in constant, meaningful communication, the product just breaks during the handoff, usually between R&D and manufacturing.
Okay, so knowing those 6 reasons for failure, how do we turn that fear into something actionable? Your sources had a bunch of tips, but let's synthesize them into practical advice for someone listening.
Right. The first, and maybe the most crucial synthesis, is to link R&D and manufacturing from day one. You have to plan for scaling up simultaneously with R&D. That means designing your initial test batches to be much larger than normal lab protocols would suggest.
Forcing the team to think about industrial processes early. It's a different mindset, not just can we make it, but can we make 50,000 of them?
Exactly. Second, you have to front load your risk assessment. That means you need to define toxicity and supply chain risks early. If your perfect material requires a rare earth element from one single supplier in an unstable region, your project is already at risk.
And what about in the lab? How do you tackle that reproducibility problem directly?
It's all about quality assurance. You have to standardize your protocols, make sure every team member uses the same measurement and characterization tools, and you log every single parameter, temperature, reagent source, humidity, no matter how small it seems. It's just non-negotiable data diligence.
And finally, to avoid that regulatory trap.
You get in touch with regulatory experts the moment you conceive of the material.
Yeah.
Safety, compliance, environmental rules. They have to be designed in from the start, not bolted on at the end. If the engineer isn't talking to the regulatory expert early, they could waste years developing something that can never legally be sold.
Excellent. Okay, let's pivot from the challenges to the payoff.
Yeah.
What are the highest demand careers that graduates are actually walking into right now?
The demand is really high across all four of those pillars. We see huge needs in the semiconductor business designing, making, and testing the next generation of chips. There's a massive appetite in pharmaceuticals and healthcare for diagnostics, imaging, and of course, that targeted drug delivery.
And energy.
The energy sector is hungry for experts in advanced batteries and ultra-efficient solar. And of course, there are always plenty of positions in academia and national research labs all over the world.
And for someone considering this path, you stress that the skills often matter more than the specific degree name. What are those non-negotiable technical skills?
The list is very practical.
Yeah.
You absolutely need proficiency in clean room techniques. You have to be able to work in that ultra-pure environment. Mastery of material characterization tools, knowing how to run an electron microscope, for instance, is essential. And you need strong skills in simulation software and data analysis to model these quantum behaviors.
But the source material also really highlighted the soft skills, right? To deal with those siloed teams.
Absolutely. The ability to engage in cross-disciplinary collaboration, to speak the language of a physicist, a chemist, and an engineer is just vital. Strong problem solving under pressure is a given, with all the reproducibility challenges. And maybe most important, the ability to clearly communicate research findings, especially when you're dealing with safety and compliance.
As we start to wrap up, every disruptive technology like this needs a balanced worldview.
Yeah.
You need to be prepared for both the skeptic's view, the people worried about unknown health effects, the massive cost of scaling, the inflated timelines.
And you also have to be able to champion the advocate's view, stressing the measurable life-changing benefits, the industrial efficiency gains, and the promise of personalized medicine.
So what does this all mean for you, operationally? How do you actually maintain that balance in your day-to-day work?
You operationalize it. You ground every single step in safety, data, and reproducibility. You define your performance metrics clearly from the start. You choose materials that are inherently safer and more scalable, and you do those regulatory compliance reviews proactively. The successful case studies we looked at weren't just about a cool innovation.
Right.
They were about achieving things like a 35 to 40% reduction in activation, backed by bulletproof documentation and fully repeatable results. The field is demanding reliable processes now, not just cool science experiments.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. It's clear that nanotechnology is a field defined by transformation and intense global collaboration, where these tiny, tiny changes lead to industrial-scale shifts. It's definitely a high-risk, high-reward environment.
And I think the ultimate takeaway is that the entire field is moving. It's shifting past the phase of proof-of-concept experiments and focusing instead on reliable and scalable processes. That shift requires management, not just science. It means prioritizing supply chains, regulatory rules, and repeatable manufacturing, especially as we approach these big milestones around 2026.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to consider. If the biggest failures in this field stem not just from technical mistakes, but from ignoring complex biological interactions and poor scale-up planning, then how will the nanotech industry, especially nanomedicine, prove to the public that safety and compliance were truly built into the system from the ground up, and not just bolted on as an expensive footnote at the end? That integrated approach, that's a critical question facing the next generation of nanotech engineers.